Let me talk first about exploiting the iPad's features. One of the keys to creating a great app is taking advantage of what the device offers. In the case of a new platform and with new possibilities, such as the iPad, exploiting advantages is especially important. The combination of hardware and system software opens up design advantages that depart from the typical design approach for desktop and laptop applications. Because the iPad evolved from the iPhone design, the iPad has design advantages that make netbooks and laptops feel complex and less useful. The iPad runs iOS just like the iPhone, and iPad apps use many of the same views and controls you use if you already developed an iPhone app. Although the iPad is potentially a lot more useful than an iPod Touch, it in many ways resembles just a larger version of the iPod Touch. One of the reasons is a consistent system environment. The home button quits your app, and the volume controls take care of audio, just like you'd expect them to, because they work just like an iPhone or iPod Touch. User preference settings can be made available in the Settings app to avoid cluttering your app's user interface. And your iPad and iPod Touch apps can coexist on an iPad with web services and apps created in HTML5. From a developer point of view, there are many similarities between the iPad and the iPhone because they both run iOS. For example, you have internet access, including voice over IP, for phone calls and messages. You can know the user's location, and you can track orientation and motion. You can also track the user's fingers on the screen, and you can play audio and video. You can access the user's contacts and calendars, and you can access the pictures in the photo library as well as the camera and the microphone. You can also cut, copy, and paste between apps and take advantage of multitasking for background processing and notifications. Let's go over these one by one. The iPad has Wi-Fi and optional 3G internet access. As with an iPhone or iPod Touch, users can send and receive email and browse the web. They can sync contacts, calendars, and notes over the internet and download content from Apple's stores. With quick and easy access, your app doesn't need to store lots of data on the iPad. All it really needs to do is jump on the internet and grab what it needs from there. The iPad also makes voice over IP applications like Skype a reality, because now you can do the same things with Skype on an iPad without a carrier service that you can do on an iPhone. In other words, you can make internet calls. And you can talk to someone and use the apps on the iPad at the same time you're making calls. And with an iPad 2, you can even make FaceTime calls because the iPad 2 has both a front and back camera. The iPad, like the iPod Touch and iPhone, also offers location services that let you create an app that can determine the device's current location or even be notified when the location changes. The iPad 3GS uses the Global Positioning System, also known as GPS, a satellite-based navigation system made up of a network of 24 satellites placed into orbit by the U.S. Department of Defense. The GPS hardware can determine its location without an internet connection. The iPad Wi-Fi model uses Wi-Fi and an internet connection to determine its location, which is less accurate than GPS, but just as useful for an app's purposes. On an iPad, apps can use location services to pinpoint your location on a gorgeous full-screen map. The screen size makes it possible to show incredible detail, as in the Beat the Traffic and Weather Channel apps, and also a wide expanse of sky over your head, as in the SkyOrb 3D app. For tracking orientation and motion, the iPad has 3 accelerometers. These are devices that detect changes in movement. Each device measures change along one of the primary axes in three-dimensional space. An app can, for example, know when the user has turned a device from vertical to horizontal, and it can change the view from portrait to landscape if doing so makes for a better user experience. You can also determine other types of motion, such as a sudden start or stop in movement, or the user shaking the device back and forth. It makes for some way cool features easy to implement. For example, you could even control a game by moving the iPad like a controller. The iPad can also track users' fingers on the screen. People use their fingers to select and manipulate objects on the iPad just like an iPhone or iPod Touch. The moves that do the work, which are called gestures, give the user a heightened sense of control and intimacy with the device. Several standard gestures, such as tap, double tap, pinch close, pinch open, flick, and drag, are used in the apps supplied with the iPad. You may want to stick with the standard gestures in your app, just because folks are already aware of and comfortable with those gestures. However, the iPad also supports multi-finger gestures, which let you go beyond standard gestures when appropriate. You can monitor the movement of each finger to detect gestures, and you can create your own. For example, in touch hockey, you can have 2 players using their fingers. Your iPad app can also play audio and video, just like an iPod Touch or iPhone. You can play sound effects or take advantage of the multi-channel audio and mixing capabilities, You can even create your own music player that has access to all the audio synced to the iPad from the user's iTunes library. You can play back many standard movie file formats, configure the aspect ratio, and specify whether controls are displayed for the video. As a result, you can put up pages that look like web pages, or book pages that look like the history of jazz, or even magazine pages such as The Daily. And you can easily mix content for an immersive experience. And just like an iPhone or iPod Touch, your app can access the user's contacts on the iPad and display that information in a different way, or use it as information in your app. What's more, your app can also present standard system interfaces for picking and creating contacts. And what you can do with contacts, you can do in a similar fashion with the calendars in the user's calendar app. Your app can even remind a user when to leave for the airport or create calendar events based on what's happening. These events show up in the calendar app and in other apps that access the calendars. As with contacts, your app can also access the pictures stored in the Photos library on the iPad, not only to display them, but also to use or even modify them. For example, the Photos app lets you add a photo to a contact, and several apps enable you to edit your photos on the iPad itself. You can also incorporate the standard system interface to use the front and back cameras of the iPad 2 in your app. A camera isn't included in the first version of the iPad, but your iPad app can access the Sync photo library as well as the synced contacts. The iPad 2 includes front and back cameras, and to show what's possible for an iPad app on an iPad 2, check out how users can record and edit HD videos with the iMovie app from Apple. And since a user can record audio with the built-in microphone, you can imagine an app that can record vocals for a song, as you can do with GarageBand, another app from Apple. Since the iPad runs iOS just like an iPhone, it provides support for copy, cut, and paste operations within and among apps. It also provides a context-sensitive edit menu that can display the copy, cut, paste, select all, and delete commands. So although each iPad application is generally expected to play in its own sandbox, you do actually have ways to send small amounts of data between apps. Although iOS doesn't have true multitasking, it does have instant on task switching that reduces application startup and makes it easier to continue right where you left off. For certain kinds of apps, you can also process events in the background. For example, an app can play audio in the background, or process location events, or even provide the ability for a user to make voice over internet phone calls. What you can also do is post local notifications as a way to get a user's attention when important events happen. Just like an iPhone, your app can notify you if, for example, you've received a message. Applications can also schedule the delivery of local notifications for a future date and time, and have those notifications delivered even if the app isn't running. As you already know, most iPhone apps are designed to take advantage of the iPhone's multi-touch display, accelerometer, and location services. However, you can create iPad apps that are not just a little bit better than their iPhone counterparts, but a lot better. For example, the iPad offers a large display capable of breathtaking imagery. At 1024 by 768 pixels, the iPad display offers enough space to show a laptop application, which is one reason why web pages look so great. Photos and video already look fantastic on this display, but the artwork you create yourself for your app should be set to 24 bits. That's 8 bits each for red, green, and blue. In addition, you should have an 8-bit alpha channel to specify how a pixel's color should be merged with another pixel when the two are overlaid on top of each other. In general, the PNG format is recommended for graphics and artwork on the iPad. The iPad offers a wider range of apps that can work with the media elements and data files that users already have on their computers. Users can sync their photos, contacts, calendars, music, video, and other content from their computers, again, just like the iPhone. But some apps, such as Bento from FileMaker and Apple's iWorks apps, users can also sync data and share files with a computer. Users can connect the iPad to an HDTV or projection system in order to show the content to a larger audience. And of course, you still have the capability to plug in an external keyboard to use the iPad almost like a laptop, and you can pair a Bluetooth wireless keyboard with the iPad as well. But perhaps the most important design decision to make, whether you're starting from scratch with a new iPad app or evolving one from an iPhone app, is to use the large iPad screen and the new user-based elements to give people access to more information in one place. Although you don't want to pack too much information into one screen, you also want to prevent people from feeling that they must visit many different screens to find what they want. An iPad app can offer the primary content on the main view and then provide additional information or tools in an auxiliary view, such as a popover, as you can see with Google Earth. The popover appears on top of the main view and gives users access to functions without requiring them to leave the context of the main view. You can also use a split view to display more than one view on screen at a time. For example, you can organize your app with a master list and detailed list of menu choices, or in a layout for landscape orientation with a source column on the left and a view on the right, similar to the Mac OS X versions of iTunes and iPhoto and exemplified by the Settings and Contacts apps on the iPad. These examples show how you can redesign an app to get rid of or at least minimize that modal experience that you get when you use a smartphone app. You know, that sinking feeling of having only one path of communication to perform a task or supply a response. Modality prevents freedom and forces the user to choose a particular path. But iPad apps should allow people to interact with them in nonlinear ways. Lists are a common way to efficiently display large amounts of information. And lists are very useful in the iPad too. And you should take this opportunity to investigate whether you can present the same information in a richer way on the larger display. If you're familiar with iPhone apps and Mac apps, think somewhere in between. With the iPad, the touch-sensitive display, you no longer have to create different screens of menus as you might for an iPhone app, or deploy drop-down menus and toolbars as you might for a Mac app. You can instead use split-screen views and popovers. Another advantage of the iPad is that you can make the app do relevant tasks at the appropriate times. For example, your app can bring up a special keyboard unique to the task. In Apple's Numbers app for the iPad, if you tap a numeric formula, the app displays a special numeric and function keyboard rather than the full text keyboard. Not only that, the app can recognize what you're doing and finish the function, such as a sum function, for you. The iPad's large display may tempt you to consider a design for your app that would look good on a laptop, but you should not forget the first rule of iPhone design: make its content and functions relevant to the moment, and that applies to the iPad as well. The iPad, like the iPhone, adds mobility to the party. This ability to run apps wherever you are makes it possible to have information you need, as well as the tools you'd like to use, constantly available. But it's not just about the fact that the app you need is ready to run right there on your iPad. It's more importantly about how the app is designed and implemented. It needs to require as little as possible from the user in terms of effort when it comes to delivering results. An iPad app can present information relevant to where you are, what time it is, what your next activity might be, and how you're holding the device in portrait or landscape, tilting or shaking, and so on, just like an iPhone or iPod Touch app. But it can do more. For example, to crop and mask out parts of an image in Apple's Keynote app for the iPad. This is the app that lets you create slideshows. You don't have to select a photo and then hunt for the cropping tool like you would for a Mac app, or select a menu item like you would for an iPhone app. Just double tap the image, and a mask slider appears. The iPad platform also offers a strong foundation for pinpointing the device's current location on a map. But an app can do more than just display your location. It can anticipate why you were looking at the map in the first place. For example, the version of Google Maps for the iPad displays a full-screen map that can show your location, but it can also find commercial establishments nearby. You can search for sushi to find sushi restaurants. An iPad app can offer a more immersive experience compared with an iPhone app by adding more content. Full pages from the internet, maps you can zoom into, full-screen videos and slideshows with music, and so on. People can enjoy this content while away from their desks, on living room couches, in coffee shops, on the train, and more easily share it with others than they can using an iPhone or iPod Touch. Whenever possible, add a realistic physical dimension to your application. When I demonstrate the iPad to someone, my favorite game is to play touch hockey because it fully immerses you in an experience that resembles the physical game so well. Another is GarageBand, which turns your iPad into a musical instrument. In both examples, touch hockey and GarageBand, the large iPad display gives the app a lot more room to enable multi-finger gestures, including gestures made by more than one person. An iPad app can react to gestures and offer touch controls and pop-up settings that are relevant to what you're actually doing in the app and where you place your fingers. With a display the size of a netbook, you have a lot more screen real estate to allow dragging and two-finger gestures with graphics and images. And depending on what you're doing, a tap or gesture on a particular part of the screen can have a particular function. It's also a good idea to extend some physical metaphors, like the newspaper or book page, to provide a more immersive experience. The New York Times, for example, designed an iPad app that looks like a newspaper and also includes embedded, fully functional videos, not just videos that appear in a separate window. In the iBooks app, You swipe the page to go to the next one, just like a real book, but you can also search the entire text, add bookmarks, and change the font size. Even utility apps can be rethought to be a better experience. On the iPhone, the Contacts app is a streamlined list, but on the iPad, Contacts is an address book with a beautifully tangible look and feel. The Calendar app is also more like a daybook than a pocket calendar. The more true to life your app looks and behaves, the easier it is for people to understand how it works and to enjoy using it.